So, ladies and gentlemen, to get us started, let me now invite Minister Bujar Osmani, Deputy Prime Minister of the Government of the Republic of North Macedonia for European Affairs, in charge of European Affairs, to take the microphone and introduce his comments. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Let me give you another argument why your title is very appropriate, Balkan 360, having in mind that we are North Macedonia, from Western Balkans, Southeast Europe, so really covers the 360. But let me say at the beginning that I have a great honor to be here this morning, and especially privileged to share the floor with my friend Ambassador Riker and Mr. Togsdorf, both representatives of our closest and most reliable strategic partners. I would like to thank the organizers for bringing such a distinguished group of experts in Skopje. I had the opportunity just 2 weeks ago to speak in a panel organized by German Marshall Fund in Washington, D.C. in front of distinguished audience, and to be honest, I'm loving these opportunities these days to speak to as many international friends, to share the good news from the country, from a region where the good news were not so frequent, but frankly speaking, there is a scarcity of good news worldwide, I would say. And it's a pleasure to represent these days a country which is being recognized on global scale as a success story. And this is the story of North Macedonia, the new reality in Southeast Europe. A country that just 20 months ago was another boring Balkan story, with unrecognized, with open political disputes with its two neighbors, both members of NATO and European Union, with internal challenges, unclosed peace agreement from 18 years ago, and even threatened internal stability due to threatened democratic institutions, check and balances, rule of law, and democratic accountability. And now we have just 20 months after, a new star has been born. A new narrative has been created, a new culture of compromise has been established. Now we have a country, or the only country in the region, without a single open dispute with its 5 neighbors, with closed legislative part of peace agreement from 2001, but also from shaken institutions due to the reform agenda that we have introduced through our reform plans for 3, 6, 9, and then 18, which it shows the trend of intensity of the reform agenda that has been introduced to establish the rule of law, democratic institutions, and, as I said, democratic accountability. And people ask how this is possible. How is possible in such a short period of time, in 20 months, to achieve these miracles in a region not very much known for the culture of compromises? And I say it's the hope and partnership that made the formula to reach this success. Hope for better future, for stability, for security, and for economic well-being that NATO and EU provides to our citizens, but also through partnership that we have built with the member states of NATO and EU throughout these years, but especially throughout the year of crisis. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope it wasn't too extensive, and thank you very much again for inviting me here.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Let me now turn over to Ambassador Philip Rieker. Some of you remember him from his tour. He is currently at the U.S. European Command and will be moving to Washington to become acting Secretary of State for European Affairs. Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for inviting me here today. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister. It's not only great to share this dais with you, but to hear your wise words, and I look forward to further meeting with you today, as well as with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and others. Here, I really want to extend my sincere gratitude to our hosts, the George C. Marshall Center and to the German Marshall Fund, two institutions of which I have the most profound respect and have worked with over the years. And I bring the greetings of General Scaparrotti, the commander of the United States European Command, my current boss. And I'm very pleased that my colleague, Andy Plitt, has come also from Stuttgart to join us today and can stay on and participate through the rest of the day. I think it's very important to underscore, as was said at the opening, that this is a German and U.S. Initiative and partnership, and really represents the best of engagement, cooperation, and leadership, which is something that Secretary Pompeo, whom I joined a couple of weeks ago on his travels in Central Europe, underscored at every stop. As a former public affairs officer here in Skopje and later the U.S. ambassador here, I am absolutely delighted to be back. I think the only thing that could make it nicer would be if Solveig could have joined me, my wife, but she sends her regards to many, many friends, and I hope next time she'll be able to travel from Berlin and join me on a visit, because it's really especially heartening to visit now as North Macedonia takes an enormous step forward towards its rightful place in Europe and NATO. And the same enormous potential that I've always proudly promoted as part of U.S. foreign policy and felt from my heart is still very much here, and on a beautiful day like today, where you can see the extraordinary surroundings, we're reminded that this country really does have great potential here in the heart of the Balkans. I have spent much of my diplomatic career working to strengthen the relationship between the United States and Europe more broadly, and to advance our mutual interests. I'm a great believer in history, and as we look at the anniversaries, we will celebrate this year with the 70th anniversary of NATO, and we move towards the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, and contemplate exactly what we built and accomplished in the years since, the tremendous level of stability and peace and prosperity that would have been unimaginable to generations like my grandparents. My grandfather fought in the Second World War, a German-American who, as a second-generation young man, became a Navy officer and landed not only in Italy but at Normandy some 75 years ago. It's, I think, about advancing mutual interests, and that's very much what I take to heart as I return to Washington. In fact, it's exactly 2 weeks from today, on March 18th, when I will take the helm of the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs at the State Department, following Assistant Secretary Wes Mitchell, who, as you know, was very much a friend of the region here. While I'm here today, of course, to talk about the Balkans, I would be remiss if I didn't reiterate up front that the United States remains fully committed to building and sustaining strong relationships in and across Europe with European governments and with the next generation of leaders. The transatlantic community remains the bedrock of United States foreign policy. The European Union is one of our closest partners on a whole range of international efforts. And while others may seek to draw attention to our differences, in reality, we agree on far more than we disagree. The U.S. commitment to NATO and collective defense under Article 5 also remains ironclad. As President Trump himself has said, the alliance has been the bulwark of international peace and security for nearly 70 years. And while NATO is grappling with complex challenges and must focus on increasing forces, capabilities, and readiness to meet both today's and tomorrow's challenges, we can and will do so together as allies. I think our European partners would agree that from the Caucasus to the Balkans to the Baltics and to the Arctic, Europe's frontiers are of renewed geopolitical interest for Russia and China, as Minister Osmani mentioned in his remarks. Today, Europe is undeniably a center of geopolitical competition. In recent years, Moscow has attempted to forcefully redraw borders in Eastern Europe, bullied its neighbors, launched disinformation and destabilizing interference campaigns against the West, and engaged in military buildups on its borders. To what ends it will go to extend its malign influence was made clear by Moscow's attempt to derail the NATO accession of Montenegro, where it went so far as to back a failed attempt to violently overthrow the government in Podgorica. China's 16+1 platform and the Belt and Road Initiative are projects aimed at expanding its global footprint, leveraging often questionable economic terms into malign political influence, and like Russia, seeking to undermine Western solidarity. The United States and Europe must work together to ensure the West remains the most attractive model for modern, free societies. In countries that have chosen the Western path, we will continue to champion efforts to accelerate democratic reforms that will embed them in the Western community of nations. So in this context, the United States remains committed to supporting the aspirations of all the countries of the Western Balkans to secure membership in the European Union, not out of the goodness of our hearts, but because it is in the strategic interest of the United States to have peace, prosperity, and stability in Europe, something we fought for so valiantly together 75 years ago.